humanity sets the agenda.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to the mid-morning show. Today's program has been generously brought to you by African Muslim Agency, empowering, educating, and inspiring. You can visit their website on www.africanmuslimagency.co.za. Next on our interview list is somebody remarkable that is not just an admitted attorney of the High Court and director of Mullah Incorporated, but Nabila has also been doing tireless work for women, advocating for women within our community. And she would be the right person to talk about the challenges we're facing at formalized institutions that are there and set up there to protect us all. Nabila, assalamu alaikum and welcome to Salam Media.
Wa alaikum assalam. Shukran for having me. And I must just say that the segment is long overdue.
I think so. And I have a feeling our time is not going to be enough. So we're going to just get into it. Nabila, I posted up a few pictures onto my social media pages yesterday asking people, did they find the necessary support when they went through their divorce processes? And majority of the responses coming back from women was, it's a boys' club. It has always been a boys' club. It will continue to be a boys' club. You feel like you lose every part of your dignity going through this process. And picking up from the conversation we had with Bulelwa earlier today, we spoke about the fact that it's already so difficult for women in abusive situations to deal with what they've been through, and then to be further victimized through these institutions where there is actually just more victim blaming, dignity being completely removed, that you almost come at the end of it wondering, is it even worth traveling down this road?
You know, for me, the important thing is that knowledge is power, right? And Kofi Annan said it so well, where he said, knowledge is power, information is liberating, and education is the premise of progress in every society and in every family. And that really is the root cause of the issues that we're facing, especially amongst Muslim women, is that they are not adequately equipped in terms of their rights, both in Shari and in secular law. And I believe that if women were empowered from an education perspective regarding their rights, the legal processes, what is available to them, and the legal remedies that they can explore, it will really make a difference and change the mindset of it being a boys' club.
So, but when we have these institutions that have been set up that are not actually protecting women the way it's meant to, and I'm specifically talking about women here. The rest of our conversation has always been about men and women, but in this specific one, majority of the women felt that there is no place for them as Muslim women that are protected without having to go to legal recourse. And many don't want to go the legal recourse route. Where are those institutions, and how do we hold those institutions accountable for ensuring that the dignity of both the men and women are respected and accorded for through the process?
Look, unfortunately, given the fact that there are these institutions that exist, and I understand the reservations, I've had clients who've come overwhelmed and frustrated by the processes that they were subjected to with minimal outcome or resolve. The unfortunate thing is, and as much as it might be an aversion to seek legal counsel or legal redress or utilize experts, even under those forums, there is a need for it. So even if you are approaching a forum that's not a legal forum, if you want to call it a tribunal or some sort of arbitration process, there is, however, a need to have an attorney present, for example, to ensure that rights are being protected, to have counselors present, to ensure that the children are adequately protected. And it really should be a synergy of people coming together in those forums to make sure that both parties have the best outcome. Unfortunately, in a divorce, you're always going to have both of them walking away unhappy. It's the level of unhappiness that you can manage.
I think that is spot on. The way you've just described it is both parties leave unhappy. It's really, people need to realize divorce is never nice for anyone going through it. And as you mentioned, it's a level of unhappiness you're willing to find acceptable for you. But Nabila, you mentioned something very pertinent now in terms of having your rights protected. When nikahs are done, we have mahrams that are present. Whereas now, when you're going through a divorce process, women are being forced to go alone to these proceedings, where it's mainly a male orientated meeting and there's no mahram present. So if in your most defining moments of making your nikah, mahram is present, why are mahrams not present also? And I know it's not necessarily yours to answer this, but because of the work that you do, why are mahrams, or why are we not pushing for mahrams to be present during the divorce proceedings as well?
So, I mean, we've actually pushed for representation being present, whether that's a mahram or even a legal person, just to be there to hold a hand and to ensure that there isn't any level of bias. I don't think that there's an exclusion of mahrams. I think it's the mahram's inability to actually deal with the issues at hand. Let's think about society, for example. Males in our society are not adequately equipped with the tools and the knowledge and the skills to know about what happens when you get divorced. I mean, it's very easy for a father and a brother to give their sister or their daughter away in Nikah because, you know, all they need to do is verify that the gold coin is in fact gold. But when it comes to aspects of divorces, they don't have the knowledge or the resources to deal with aspects of maintenance, of care, contact, and access, to talk about abuse, which is such a stigma and so taboo in our community still in this day and age, that it's kind of, you know, they shy away from that responsibility because of societal stigma and not because there's an exclusion.
That brings me to the topic of nikah contracts. So majority of the responses with regards to that, people 38 and older said absolutely not. None of them had nikah contracts. It wasn't something that was done. It wasn't something that was discussed. It was never a discussion point at all. But many of the younger people and people who were aware of Islamic knowledge and Islamic rulings did actually have nikah contracts in place. What I did find was that not all of them felt they would necessarily ask for nikah contracts for when their children decided to get married. How pertinent do you feel a nikah contract is, and what does it include? Because as I mentioned earlier in the show, we often scream about our rights, but very little talk about what our obligations and duties are. Would a nikah contract cover both of that for both parties?
So a nikah contract is a contract between two parties and regulates the relationship going forward. And yes, it does dictate the rights and obligations of both parties. And I think it gives women and men alike clarity. You know, they say that marriage is an eye-opener, and it really shouldn't be the eye-opener when you're already in the relationship. And the reason why we have things like premarital counseling and these premarital contracts, antenuptial contracts, is so that people understand their rights going forward. A woman knows what a man knows what a woman's expectations are. A woman knows what her rights are. Men know what their obligations are. And also it assists with dealing with aspects like divorce. You know, we've now incorporated issues like talaq al-tafweed, where a woman is given the right to take a divorce under certain circumstances so that she doesn't feel that she's at his mercy or beck and call when it comes to an abusive relationship and she needs to get out.
So, Nabila, being in this space, and I know the amount of work that you do generally, not just from your professional capacity, but also from your social capacity as well, with regards to women being able to get their divorces. I think we understand, and this is by no means an advocation in the show to say everyone needs to go out and get divorced, because there is a sanctity in marriage that we need to uphold for the sake of family values, for the sake of community. But when it is cases where either party, male or female, really does not want to be in that marriage, there is abuse at any level, whether it's physical, mental, spiritual, emotional. What is the process in terms of going forward? Because yes, as you mentioned, divorce is not a pleasant thing for anyone concerned. But then we almost find it getting to a point where families are pitting against each other because it's a competition of who comes out better and who's won and who's vindicated, because some win means their child is vindicated and now is seen as better. How would you advise families and communities to be able to go through this with the least amount of pain, maintaining dignity of families? Because one of the responses came back is that there is no dignity left. The dignity is out the window. And I keep thinking we seem to again forget the value of what these nikahs are, that we take people with dignity, but we also need to let them go in dignity as well.
You know, there's a reason why Allah says that I have perfected for you your deen, because in every question there's an answer that you can find in Quran, and there is a process that's outlined in the Quran in terms of dealing with dispute resolution. You know, initially when Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam had issues with his spouses, there was a period of ilah that he had where he left the home, obviously less than 4 months, and it gave the couple time to think about what the issues were and reflect on what they wanted, and come back together with clarity to see how they can resolve their marital disputes. It then flows to where the parties should be able to talk to each other. In the event that they cannot, then a mahram from both sides should be appointed as mediators to deal with the divorce. And finally, if that is it's an option that's not available to the parties, you can then appoint an independent person to preside over hearing both sides of the story and coming to some sort of resolution. And as we know, Allah is muqallib al-qulub. If both parties want to resolve their disputes and want to salvage their marriage, He will turn their hearts in the right direction. I understand that where there's issues of abuse, it does become difficult. It is an acrimonious situation, but there really should be an attempt to draw the emotion out of it. And I find that families are not the appropriate bodies to use as mediators, because they will consider their child's feelings and their child's reputation and may over-validate certain feelings or emotions or actions or try and justify it, which is why there should be an independent person. And we do have those resources available within our communities and society where a mediator gets appointed and they try to deal with issues overall.
So, Nabila, you touched on so many points. And I think one of the first ones that stands out for me is that we have to understand and realize that our religion is not just a religion, it's actually a code of governance. And as you said, it's already written out for us in terms of how we do dispute resolution. But very often, and we've seen this, is we selectively choose what works for us and what doesn't work for us. And when it works for us during a divorce, then this is Islamic, and then it isn't Islamic when we decide we don't want to maintain or pay for our children or anything like that. And that's a full-on discussion that we're coming into tomorrow. But coming to what you said now, I think you spot on by saying that as families of both sides, we always tend to get overly emotional when it comes to our own children. And this is always the problem, because you will never be able to see reason or logic when it comes to actually being able to say to your child, you've done this wrong, or this is where you fell short, because no marriage breaking apart is ever just one person. There's always something on both sides and the truth somewhere in between, because we'll always see or approach experiences, a situation based on our own experiences. How do we end up finding these arbitrators and these mediators to ensure that we've got conscious, Islamically conscious, level-headed people to be able to facilitate this? And the reason I say Islamically conscious, because I don't think it's just about somebody who has religious knowledge, but it's also someone who has an awareness that they are answerable of doing right by all parties concerned, not just by their friend or somebody that they see in the room.
Talking about Jamiats and ulama seems to become a very sensitive topic, because I know most women have had negative experiences in approaching those sort of forums, but we have progressed. And there's a lot of ulama that have welcomed legal assistance and even legal presence when it comes to having these mediations, where the ulama assist from an Islamic and a Shari'i perspective to ensure that, Sharia is always upheld. Even though we're attorneys and we practice secular law, we're still Muslims at the end of it all. And the lawyers are there to make sure that rights are protected, that the children's best interests are upheld. And it really has to be a tag team effort. There are institutions like the Muslim Mediation and Arbitration Councils. There is an organization, it's called an Islamic court, but I'm loath to call it a court. Let's call it a tribunal or a forum. That also make mediation available. There are attorneys that render their services as mediators who have sufficient levels of knowledge, and to the extent that they require ulama intervention, do invite ulama to be present in these mediations to ensure that we preserve the beauty of our religion without the need to approach a court that doesn't really cater for our rights and obligations.
I think that has summed it up so well, because that really sets a huge question for why we need to actually go the legal route. If those kind of structures were already in place with that same set of mind, the one thing it begs the question is that you talk very true to the point of having a sense of an Islamic balance, understanding that before you're a lawyer, there's an Islamic basis in that. However, we see that this disappears in many cases where women are going through divorce and they're told, get this lawyer before your husband does, because you will have nothing left. There's no sense of ethics. There's no sense of morality. Are we not? I know that we've got lawyers associations that are governed under our banner, Muslim Lawyers Association, and that is there any sort of governing of lawyers to say that we have to exercise a level of fairness, we have to exercise a level of Islam to ensure that no woman or male leaves this feeling like every part of their dignity has been stripped, and also losing faith, not just in the system, but in who they are and how they've been put into the situation.
Look, the sad reality is that it's people dependent. Your level of taqwa, your fear of Allah is really dependent. And I can't speak for all attorneys, but I do know that the attorneys that I work with and the attorneys within my network, we always remind each other that we are Muslims first. And the first point of call when we do receive divorce instructions is call each other to say, let's sit down and see how we can resolve this. But again, it's not the same across the spectrum. And I do know that certain attorneys have a reputation for being the bulldog and, for getting you what you want out of a divorce, even though it may not necessarily be in line with Shari'i. Unfortunately, that's not something that we can control. And no, there is no regulatory body that dictates that we should uphold Sharia over any secular law, which does make it difficult. And, within practice, I find that a lot of non-Muslim attorneys have called me asking how to handle aspects of talaq, and now with the recognition of Muslim marriages, how to deal with those matters going forward. And my advice has been to them that if this is not up your alley, please do not accept the instruction, because there is a greater responsibility than just going to court to get your client's wishes ordered.
And I think that's important also for the Muslim general community and population at large to know about as well, because it's not just, and I'm saying this both again for men and women, it's not just about I'm going to take him for everything he's got, or I'm going to teach him a lesson, or I'm going to teach her a lesson. And we end up becoming again, I don't even know if the word is selfish. I think it's so much more than that. It becomes ruthless and manipulative. And even as lay people going into the system, thinking you're teaching your spouse a lesson, you are literally also defying your own levels of where your ethics and your morals and your values. So, Nabila, how do you manage and navigate such a challenging time where any spouse, whether male or female, sitting in your office feels hard done by and feels that they need to teach the next person something, so wants to go to court, wants to go down that route, wants to go and be the bulldog in court? How do you manage that from your perspective as well?
Unfortunately, it's a thing called the ills of the ego. And when it comes to divorces, it does become a battle between egos and, who becomes the victor and who had the better attorney. But the sad reality is that the only victor at the end of any legal divorce proceedings, and I say this to all of my clients, are the attorneys. And truth be told, that's a God-given fact, because you've spent all of this money, you've engaged in a 3 to 5 year legal battle, only for you to come out with what the law allows, which is what you would have possibly got had you entered into a settlement agreement to begin with. And really, the lawyers are the only ones that make money at the end of it all. The thing is with being a Muslim attorney is that we've got an obligation to sort of ensure that our clients think level-headed, and that they do put Allah before their emotions and before the want for revenge. And we generally don't entertain anything that goes beyond our scope when it comes to Sharia. And it is a fine line, but fortunately we do have the choice to decide on matters that we want to take on. And most clients often, when the emotional stage has passed, because a lot of what we do is, we're in the trauma business, so a lot of what we do is manage people's emotions. And when you get them out of that emotional state, it's a lot more easier to navigate them through the process and sort of rationalize with them on how to deal with divorces going forward. There are, however, attorneys who, for them, this is going to be 3 years worth of fees, irrespective of the outcome. Let's just do this because, it's my vocation, if you want to call it that.
And I truly appreciate your honesty in this, because I think it's also very difficult to be in that profession and to say it the way it is. And I really appreciate you being real and being honest about it, because I think many people need to know it. And I think that's why so many women turn to you, because of the realness of saying, let's not extend it for years to come. Let's try and deal with it as quickly and as amicably as we can. Nabila, what is your advice to women who are in difficult situations, in difficult circumstances, in abusive situations, when it comes to finding reprieve with the various institutions that have been set up, which they feel without a doubt, and over the years, there are people who've responded saying it's happened years before, people who are currently going through it, where they feel they actually are being stripped of their dignity, that they are not being treated as Muslim women should be treated. Where's the reprieve? What is your advice to them?
Empower yourself. knowledge really is power. And as old as the saying is, there's value and there's weight in it. As long as you know what your rights are, and as long as you know what obligations are afforded to you, there's no one that can take that away from you. Dignity can be stripped where a person is ignorant. And you shouldn't be a victim of your circumstances. You should always aim to be the victor. And the only way that you can do that is if you educate yourself, attend empowerment workshops, find good circles of friends who can empower you, seek legal counsel before going into any mediation or arbitration, only so that you know that when you're going in, you are better prepared. We often find that women go in without any knowledge. They don't know the extent of their rights. They're already in a vulnerable space. They're already overwhelmed by the totality of their circumstances. It's the fear of the unknown. And then they end up going into these settings and they cave. And I mean, as recent as yesterday, I had a message saying, I was too embarrassed to tell you that I went, and I just gave in because I was very overwhelmed. And it's the same tune that we get. Even women that we get them out of abusive relationships, and then you find 2 weeks later they're back in that abusive relationship because they sucked into this vicious cycle due to the lack of education and the lack of the resources that are available to them, so that they can empower themselves and actually enforce their rights. And going forward to ensure that they're protected. So for me, it's educate yourself. If you need to speak to an attorney, I mean, there's a lot of us that offer pro bono advice. There's a lot of centers that offer pro bono legal services that are really good at what they do. And once you know that you're adequately equipped, you know the extent that you can fight, you know the extent of what you're entitled to, it's easier to go into those settings because then you're not going to settle for anything less than what's due to you.
And just in closing off with this discussion, I think the one thing, though, is many women feel that they've always been surrounded, and especially our older women, with men who have been their protectors. So you walk into these settings assuming that your protectors will take care of you as a Muslim woman, that your rights will be honored as a Muslim woman, that your dignity will be respected as a Muslim woman, only to find that it's consistently violated at every level. So there has to be a level also of accountability, of insight, of understanding of these people who we are putting up into these institutions to be there for these women. How are we as civil society or as a legal society honoring that accountability, or ensuring that we have the right people being put up there? Because who's doing oversight of that to ensure that we've put the right people up there who are adequately trained to maintain the dignity of both spouses at the table?
Look, the sad reality is because there is no oversight body, there's no way that any of us can control it, not me or not you. We can't control who is going to be presiding over a certain matter. And I think it comes down to holding them accountable when it comes to qualifications, asking what level of knowledge they have, what level of experience, how often have they dealt with these type of matters, insisting that experts be involved, whether it be legal or psychological or anything like that, to ensure that they get a fair chance at dealing with a matter. And the only way that you can do that is if you are firm in your approach that your rights should be protected. And if you feel that you are in a situation where you're being told to make sabr, don't go through the process. You're going to sit there and go through the heartache of just being ignored, being told that your reward lies in a higher power. And I really don't think that that's the case. Exit from the situation, find better representation, and have someone come with you that will fight and will advocate for you. Yasmin Mujahid said it so well when she said, issues of abuse is like your house on fire. You can't continue to stay there and say, I'll just make dua and inshallah the fire will go away. You actually need to do something, whether that's pour water over the flames or run out of the house. It's not a situation of, let's just make sabr and persevere, and ultimately there's going to be some sort of good outcome at the end of it. So from an accountability perspective, you really just need to make sure that the choice of selection when it comes to your arbitrators or your mediators, your representatives, and I know often we want to have our family there, but it's for emotional support. They may actually do you an injustice in dealing with your matter from a legal perspective, from a rights perspective. So make sure that you've got a good circle of people to support you, because support is important when you are going through aspects such as divorce, such as maintenance, such as childcare, contact and access. And these are issues that although you deal with it at divorce, they continue until your children are 18 years old. So as long as you've got the right support structure, that will make the journey a lot easier.
Nabila, Jazakallah so much for joining us on air today. I think you shared huge pearls of wisdom, and it's still a lot of things that we need to unpack on a more regular basis. And I think the one thing that you stated towards the end that stays with me is dignity is stripped when you are ignorant of your rights and obligations. And I think that's a huge message to hit home, to say, go and learn about your rights, go and learn about your obligations, and then find the right people to help you through this process so that your dignity can be maintained. Nabila, Jazakallah for joining us on air. And shukran to you for all the work that you do in our community on a regular basis.
Shukran for having me, and may Allah reward you for opening up the platform. I know there's a lot of people who have had questions that are hopefully answered, and without the fear of you having to pay for the advice first and foremost, because I know how painful that can be. And also just without the exposure or the embarrassment.
Absolutely. And we're really thankful for that. That's Nabila Mullah, admitted attorney of the High Court, director of N Mullah Incorporated, and a huge social activist for Muslim women within our community. Jazakallah for joining us. We'll be taking a short ad break and we'll continue then with the program. Stay tuned.